millions of people are locked down right now. How strict are the lockdown conditions?
They could hardly be stricter. I mean, I think people in Australia, many people think they sort of lived through, especially if you've been in Melbourne, there's some of the strictest COVID measures in the world over the last few years. What's happening in Xi'an, a city of 13 million, is just on another planet. I mean, I guess the closest comparison ever in the Australian context will be what happened in those public housing towers in Melbourne for a couple of days where everyone had stay-at-home orders. Well, imagine that across a city of 13 million. That's a city the size of Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane combined. And they're now more than a fortnight into that. And they're not allowed to leave their home at all. They're reliant on government deliveries of food. Now, there was concerns for a while their deliveries weren't coming, so naturally people very worried as their stockpiles were dwindling down or exhausted. But those food parcels are coming through now, it seems, from the government. But what's happened since, and again, just a step up from what's ever happened in Australia, people, if they test positive or if they're a close contact, they're being removed from Xi'an city limits. There's now about 42,000 who are in special purpose quarantine facilities outside of the city. And so the new anxiety in Xi'an that you see a lot on Chinese social media is that this worry about will I get a knock on my door and be without any capacity to push back, taken to one of these facilities.
That would be quite concerning. I wouldn't want to be in that situation at all. There are 91 confirmed cases of COVID in the country. Is it too late for a zero COVID approach with the spread of Omicron?
In China, it's never too late. They call it a dynamic COVID zero policy. And look, they're now less than a month away, just under a month away from the Beijing Winter Olympics. That's partly what's giving such urgency to all this. It's why the Chinese government, with Xi Jinping at the top in Beijing, have made a decision that COVID zero is their policy. Omicron hasn't changed their minds on that at all. Delta didn't change their minds. If anything, it's hardened their position that that's the only way to deal with this. They look at America with over 1 million cases yesterday and think that's a disaster. You have to remember in China, they've got a much less well-resourced healthcare system. So huge numbers of cases would be much more deadly in China than they would in richer countries like Australia or America. They have got quite a high vaccination rate, over 80%, but again, that's with Chinese vaccines, Sinopharm and Sinovac. They're pretty good at stopping you dying. They're not very good at stopping spread, and they're not perfect, like any vaccine, at stopping hospitalisation. So the Chinese authorities are really cautious about this. They are insistent that they will continue to pursue COVID zero. They're not changing. They won't before the Beijing Olympics. All local officials here in China are under intense pressure to fulfill those objectives, to get down to zero COVID. And, as the people in Xi'an are learning, I mean, that can make for some pretty brutal tactics. But look, the officials there, the latest numbers from them, the latest daily count, as much as we can trust those, say that the numbers are coming down. They're under 100 for the first, yesterday's daily count was under 100, so that's trending down. There's some debate how much that's to do with just people being moved out of city limits into these facilities. But look, based on China's experience over the last 2 years, I wouldn't bet against them getting back to zero. It just question with this is at what cost.
Right, so the pressure is well and truly on to try and get COVID completely out before the Winter Olympics. What are the options if China can't do this?
Oh, look, they'll just keep tightening up restrictions. I mean, it looks like Xi'an has at least, the cases have been curtailed there. There's another city to the east of Xi'an in Henan province, and that's a city of 1.3 million people, Yuzhou. That's also gone into a total lockdown. I mean, the trigger for that was 3 asymptomatic cases. So all around the country, local officials, Communist Party officials, know that they have been told by Beijing, do not endanger the Beijing Olympics, do not allow an outbreak. This is a big moment for China. It's a big moment for the central government. Your career, this will not be a career-enhancing move if an outbreak happens under your watch. And so all around the country, people are watching what's happening in Xi'an. local officials this is with horror, and now you're seeing huge reactions as even again by Chinese standards, very drastic restrictions are coming in, triggered by as little as a single asymptomatic case in a city, or even in some cases, a single case in a city or province neighbouring your city. So people are super cautious. I think you'll just see a tightening and a tightening across the country until the Beijing Olympics, which starts on February 4th. Now, then that's going to continue throughout the Beijing Olympics and then the Paralympics, so for the whole of February. And then we won't be far from the National People's Congress in March, so I'd expect them to continue throughout that. And then at the end of 2022, we've got a hugely important political event, the 20th Party Congress, where Xi Jinping is going to get his third term as president. That's also a huge event. So, look, China, the Beijing leadership wants COVID zero to continue. They want it to continue on that political timeline until at least the end of 2022. And I mean, officials are just going to have to make it happen. Now, this current outbreak, I should point out, is of Delta, which is less infectious than Omicron. How all this is going to work if Omicron gets seeded, who knows? I mean, what may happen as you see what's going on in Xi'an happening in cities across the country. But look, we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, China is taking a strategy that's almost unique in the world now. In Taiwan, where I am, they also have just about zero COVID cases, but with nothing like the drama or draconian measures that you see in China. But Taiwan is a country of 23 million people, much smaller, far better cooperation, a much richer country as well, with high levels of trust, so is able to take a different approach to China. I mean, China is really out there pursuing something quite unique and something they're quite proud of, their record over the last 2 years. But, 2022 is going to be a really interesting year to watch China's COVID management.
Be a few big months ahead. It will be interesting to watch it all unfold. Will Glasgow, we have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.